So some of the topic that I already mentioned is that we need to get a better understanding how different standards, tools and services work together inside a BSI, but also outside the BSI. So IFC 4.3, of course, then we do have the use case management, BSDD, which is the buildingSMART data dictionary. I'm sure that it might be something that you already know, and then the IDS, which is the information delivery specification, but also for the life cycle. So it's about the ISO 19615, how to move from project information to the asset information. There has been a good presentation already yesterday that how we will make this happen. Also the asset register, maybe the databases for the owner organization, where do we kind of maintain all the data that has been collected. So it's not the IFC files. The IFC files is the for the transformation or transfer the information, but then we do need to have some type of register for containing the data. And of course, there has been some topics for the IFC as an archive format, and especially in the regulatory room, there it has been ongoing conversation, and some of the countries has accepted already IFC to become an archive format. So I guess these elements are crucial for us in the future also to move forward. And also the understanding that what needs to standardize and how these different tools and standards can be really implemented. So there is, of course, this international level where we are at the moment, but then everything needs to be implemented in the national level according to the national maybe classification or national processes, or even maybe some processes for the authorities. So how then these international standards work in the national level, then there might be some organizational level maybe requirements, especially for the owner organization in this infrastructure field. So it could be the classification, it could be also the attributes, it could be the predefined list for specific elements, for example. And then it goes all the way to the project level. And we have had a very great many examples about the project level, that how all this could work together, but then kind of have the full big picture that it's not about the separate or single project to decide. Those requirements and demands needs to come a higher level for the project if we follow the ISO 19615. So maybe have this big picture also to work better. And then there is the diagram about this use case management, IDS, and then BSDD, how they work together. And this is definitely also something that we need to look closer. But then the infra room roadmap streams. So we do have the streams. Tim will go more detailed level about the streams. This is the update about the infra room roadmap, the draft version, and Jim will give you the latest version, how this will look like, because we have had at least one more local chapter workshop between these two summits. But there's many different ways that we have been collect maybe the business needs from the field. We have been using this local chapter workshop. We have also had the conversation inside the steering committee, and we have had the workshops in the summits that what we see that should be the focus areas for the coming years. And then maybe more detailed view for some of these actions or activities. So of course, the first topic is IFC for infra. This has been recognized some time ago. Then of course BSDD for infrastructure, IFC and GIS for the infrastructure, and overall view of the infrastructure project process. So maybe adopt ISO 19650 and see what are the how does it influence in different part of the life cycle of a project or the assets. But then the general information about the summit and our sessions during the summit. So the summit has been built up a bit differently than in the past. Maybe some of you have used to that we do have many infra-room sessions, but in this summit we have only 3 infra-room dedicated sessions. So in this afternoon we will have the RC tunnel session, and tomorrow we will have the BIM for bridge demo for IDS workflow, and then the bridge test instruction. But then we do have also the shared session, so these shared room topics. So tomorrow we will have the RC 4.3 deployment and adoption. And then at the same time, unfortunately, we do have a little conflict with the calendar. We do have the other shared room topic, which is asset operation handover. And the hall you can find in the agenda. I don't have the hall here as that where they are supposed to be, but asset operation handover, I assume, is exactly in the same place where we are at the moment. And then we do have also the joint session together with the airport room and the railway room about the BSDD. And it's actually at the same time then we do have the infra room 3 session tomorrow. So tomorrow we will have a lot of sessions that are conflict with each other. So I'm sorry about that, but it was because of the kind of many sessions at the same time, ongoing sessions, and there wasn't room enough for have these sessions in the different times. So shortly, how to eat an elephant. So standardize, test, implement, and repeat. And that's what we are constantly doing here in InfraRoom, and hopefully with you and with a real project in your own country and in your own organization. So also sharing the best practices. So I hope that you enjoy your conference, and we continue with the updates from the roadmap session. Thank you.
Is this on? Yes. Sounds on, doesn't it? I sometimes feel like a bit of a broken record on this topic because we have been reporting this successively at each summit, and so I do apologize if I repeat things that you've heard me say before, but I need to sort of go back a little bit in history to explain where we're up to. So these slides are actually pretty much the slides I used at the Room Leaders Conference in London earlier this year, back in January, and but I think they're important for this group just to get the same kind of message. So we've been working on the roadmap now since last year, throughout last year, and giving updates at the summits. And very recently, we had a fortnight ago, we had a roadmap session in Washington, D.C. So the US chapter have begun their process of thinking about how they want to contribute to our planning and our future roadmap. So I'm going to be updating you on what we've done since Montreal and what has happened in the US, and then Mike Kennelly, who's up the back, is going to ad lib, I think, in a to kind of bring his perspective as a member of the steering committee, representing. I don't like to use the word representing, but on behalf of AASHTO, he has a seat on the steering committee, and so he will talk about the US priorities that came out of that workshop. So I'm going to go back a little bit in history, talking about the activity streams, then the chapter workshops, how we then consolidated those outcomes, and Tiina's kind of jumped the gun a little bit and introduced some of those conclusions, but I'll be going through them and showing how we arrived at those, and then, as I say, the US roadmap and what the next steps are. Oh, I should be controlling this, shouldn't I? So this is an important notice because, and I've said this before, this is a process we're going through to develop a roadmap. It is not the roadmap. The roadmap will be determined this year, hopefully early this year, following all of this input that we've had. but at the moment we're still in the process of collecting the data and understanding it and figuring out how we should go forward. So what I'm talking about now is how we've processed that information and leading into next steps. So this is a work in progress, bottom line. So as Tiina just said, these are the streams that we identified. This is actually a flow on from the roadmap that we've used for the last 3 or 5 years. And as we go forward into, as we project forward into 2027, what we're attempting to do here was to understand or to speculate on more, basically what those streams would look like and roughly the kind of intensity of work, the amount of the volume of work to be done in each of those streams. So you can see that in 2023, we made consolidation in industry training sort of a primary activity. That starts to fade out a little bit during 2024 and becomes a more a narrow stream. And at the same time, the infra extension projects, which we've yet to define, what are the next steps in developing extensions to IFC for infrastructure will start to kick in. That's how we generally see it. So things like testing and piloting is an important activity which will continue fairly evenly during the 5 years as we see industry actually using and adopting IFC 4.3 and testing it and reporting back on that. The work around ontologies and the BSDD, as Tiina has hinted, is an ongoing activity. We need to define that more rigorously as we go forward, and understand it better. But it's certainly an area where we need to be working. IFC technical development support and participation. That's really acknowledging that we are not an island. We are part of BSI, and we need to. There are certain areas where we need to make input and be actively engaged in the technical development of IFC or buildingSMART more generally as we move into ultimately IFC 5 and that sort of work. White papers seem to be a topic that there's a need for us to explore through the production of white papers through our community, our infrastructure room community, to really unpack several topics. And we saw that as an ongoing activity, which is probably going to occupy a fair bit of time, but will be fairly even across the time. Liaisons with other rooms and with other organizations like OGC and SEN and ISO and so on. That is an activity which has to be there and will be going on. And of course, infra-room community outreach kind of fills in the gap at the bottom, but it's again an activity that has to be there, and we're trying to reflect that. How's that jumping forward? Is that anyway? I guess that's my next slide. So what we did over 21-22 is run a series of chapter workshops, and there were 5 of them that we ran in the past, and you can see them all listed there with a few happy snaps. No, this isn't working. And for each of those workshops, we have reported back through 2 slides. We got each workshop convener, leader, to produce 2 slides, one which, and these were presented back in Montreal, so I didn't want to repeat them here, but we basically summarized the activity, how the workshop ran and how it was organized and what, and how the activity itself. And then we got each convener of those workshops or facilitator to produce a summary sheet, which showed on the left-hand side the key points that were raised by the group within that workshop. And then we asked the convener to come back and to summarize those, capture those ideas, but to summarize them into a set of conclusions or results under each of our stream headings. And so you can't quite read it, you're not meant to read it, but this is really just to explain that process. So we went through that process for each of the workshops, and that was reported in more detail back in Montreal. Since Montreal, then all we did then was drop all that information onto our streams, and it's a rough kind of match. We sort of said this activity, which came out of, these are all color coded. So this is Swedish, if I can read that correctly. So the yellow ones are ideas that came out of the Swedish workshop, and they've just been dropped onto the stream to give us some sense of the sorts of activities. There's no timeline there. We simply put the arrows in to indicate where they sit and where they might sit. We then produced a document, or started to develop a working document, which allowed us to record all of that information. So we first of all recorded all the workshop outcomes in a single working document, and it was arranged under stream headings. And you can't read it from where you are, and you're not meant to read it. But the green text is that sort of raw data, if you like. So we have this one document which is accessible. We can point you to it, and you can look at it yourself. We then, the editorial group, then consolidate, the editorial group being the roadmap group, then consolidate those into a set of activities under each stream. So that was the blue text. And we then took that blue text, as it were, those ideas, to the Montreal Summit and had a session where we voted on them. We got some feedback from the community. So this is explaining the process. I'm sorry, I should be a bit more on top of it. So what we did was say, well, we need to prioritize those. And so we got the community to do that at the Montreal workshop. And this was a snapshot. And again, you can't read it, but you're not meant to read it. It's just to show the process we went through. So we used Miro. We listed each of the those consolidated outcomes or ideas or suggestions, and we got the community to vote for them just by putting tags on notes on each of the bubbles associated with each of those ideas. So then we were able to literally count up the notes, count up the votes, and that gave us some sense of the sort of priorities that were coming out of that. And it's really those priorities that I want to focus on now. So again, Tiina showed this slide. These are the ideas that came out of those workshops and have been associated with the particular streams, and therefore at this moment in time seem to be the ones that we should be focusing on as we go forward. So you can see the yellow ones are the priority activities that affect the infra room specifically. The red one are really ones that are done in collaboration with somebody else. So you'll see there's a few ideas that are, need to be done in collaboration with the technical stream, and there's one up there which is the use case one, which is part of the asset handover project. So they're the key ideas that came out, the summary of those results. We then, after Montreal, we had the working group that I convened within the steering committee to work out the workshop, to the roadmap, I should say. I went through and took each of those key ideas and tried to put some flesh around them, not in any deep detail, but we wanted to get some idea of what the activity might look like and what kind of resources and what sort of a time frame will be needed to do that activity, just to begin to give us a sense of how we might put this into a form of a roadmap. So I'm going to go through those a bit slowly now and walk you through them, and so you get a sense of what we see, what our community saw as being the key ideas that we need to look at. So one was this idea of IFC for infrastructure. One of the messages that came through very strongly out of all those 5 workshops was that what we don't want at the moment is to forge ahead with more extension to IFC. We need to bed down IFC 4.3. We need to let the tunnel project finish its work and deliver so that we can then consolidate where we stand at the moment and not sort of try and overextend ourselves. And one of the things that came out of that was the need for to provide guidance for our community around what the implications are of IFC for infrastructure. We need to produce a document, a white paper or a guidance document that helps our community to really get its head around what the significance is of IFC 4.3 for infrastructure and for their own organisation. So this was so the purpose here is to give guidance on the structure of IFC and how to work with standards with a standard by producing a user guide document for best practice. There's a context there, industry need, and the sort of focus areas. So that was our first attempt at explaining or thinking about what that might look like, and a project plan which has rough sort of time scale on it was developed, and the sort of resources we needed to do that. So we went through that same process for each of those items, and I'm going to go through those. The second one was the overview of infrastructure project processes. One of the ideas that came out of one of the workshops, which got quite strong support in the voting, was basically to develop a process map that shows throughout the life cycle what are the key process activities that are required in a typical infrastructure project, what the exchange requirements might be for that, but to do that at a very high level. And that would then, the thought is that would then become a framework for a more detailed process analysis of particular parts of that structure. So try and get our head around and publish a high level information delivery standard, basically an IDM, around infrastructure projects. And there I've described, or we've described that that work, and then thought about what sort of time frame that might be needed for that, and that's what this is. It actually goes over 2 pages. Then the third one was dealing with the other one that came out as a priority issue was BSDD for infrastructure. Our community needs to understand what the role of BSDD and how we can interface to that, make use of that within our infrastructure domain. And so that was seen as a very important area to look at. And again, it's been fleshed out a little bit here under the headings of purpose, context, industry need, and the focus areas. And again, we did the analysis of what we thought that might take. The first step would be to create a white paper and then start to develop that as a program going forward. Why is that not behaving itself? I give up. It's got a will of its own. So the fourth one was IFC and GIS for infrastructure. Again, that's a topic that's been explored quite a bit over the last couple of years, and but our community came back very strongly and said this is a really important issue. We need to understand what how to relate and how to integrate GIS tools and software and processes into our into infrastructure works. And so this will be seen as a white paper to explore that in detail and to help our community understand what the implications are for our community. And again, we produced a project plan, a very rough project plan, to get some idea of what it might look like. And then the last one was the asset operations handover project, which is there's already a project proposal on the table. It's moving forward. It's got a bit of funding now from within our community, but it needs more funding to go ahead. But it's being driven by Jeffrey Ollett, and there is a separate session on that, which I encourage you to participate in. But it was certainly an area that we need to get involved in as an infrastructure community in order to make sure that the outcome of that work reflects our needs in infrastructure. So far, up to this point, most of the work that has been done in that area has had a building focus, and we need to make sure that we get an appropriate focus built into that, and particularly use cases that are relevant to infrastructure. And again, we developed a project plan, one of our team members did, and began to identify the sorts of resources. So that's probably one of the priority projects because it's already on the table. It's only really looking for a bit more funding. Sorry, not a bit more funding, significant more funding in order for it to get off the ground, but it's a really important project for our community. So there were the 5 priority topics. Here I've just listed, and you have access to these slides, but these are the votes and all the low priority items that received less than 7 votes. And so this slide is really maintaining the reality that those ideas are on the table. They just haven't been given priority by our community at this point. So they're sitting there. We then put those ideas onto the stream background, and we added a few that are fairly obvious things identified by the current steering committee that need to be addressed. And so this begins to take shape as a kind of a roadmap, but it's only indicative. It's not the next step will be to develop a roadmap from that, following the template of BSI template for documenting a roadmap going forward. But again, it's just those key ideas put onto the map, and the implication is that all of these activities, the priority ones, need to begin in 2023. They'll probably extend into 25, but then there'll be more activities that we need to work with as we go forward. So we're not even, the roadmap will be an evolving process, not set in stone at this point. We then had a workshop in Washington, DC a fortnight ago. I was invited to go there and help to facilitate the workshop. So you'll see my ugly face in the background there, if you can kind of recognize me. And I was pleased to be able to do that and to contribute to that effort. It was jointly hosted by buildingSMART USA and AASHTO, the Joint Committee on Data Standards, and it ran on the 15th of March. You can see there that there was some local introductions to it and explanation to the community about what buildingSMART is, because not all of the participants were even aware or understood much about buildingSMART. I then gave an introduction, which is not unlike the one I've just given to you, to set the context for the work. We had 65 participants total. That's a rough count. There are around 40 in person, which is almost true if you start to count up the heads in this lower image. And there are about 25 participating virtually. 21 state DOTs, Department of Transports, were participating, plus the Federal Highways Administration and NIBS. What does NIBS stand for? Forgotten. National. Thank you. Glad someone knows. And AASHTO, the AASHTO committees, JSTAN and JTCs, were also represented, and the BIM for Bridges and the BIM for Infrastructure pooled funds, which is kind of a strange concept to me, but they're basically groups that have formed around available funding, and they were also represented. The process was to review what we asked them to do is basically the same as we went through the same process we went through in Montreal, where they reviewed our consolidated results and voted on them using Mentimeter as a tool for doing that. And they were invited to add additional ideas, and the results would be summarized to report back to the Rome Summit, which is what I'm doing now. So this is kind of following the same structure. This is a description of what we actually did, how the session was operated and who participated. And then you won't be able to see this, but this is the voting that came out of there. And if you look at the detail here, you can see, if you look closely enough, you can see the voting against each of those topics that we had as our priorities. And it's interesting that this is the detail. if you pull all that together, then under the various topics we have, there were the ones that we had already identified by Montreal as being important are the green ones, and there was an alignment there. They were seen as also as being given priority by our US colleagues. There are some which we didn't give priority to particularly, but identified as being more important than our community had flagged them. And of course, the voting process was different, and so that kind of explains partially the that they generally, if I go back a page, it's interesting to me that for most of the topics, you'll see that they all got fairly strong votes. Whereas in Montreal, there were many topics that just didn't get any, no one bothered to put a sticky note on them, so they just didn't get any ranking at all. Whereas the US, almost everything got some kind of level of voting. So the result of that is that we have a number of topics, a number of themes that have come forward and as priorities from the point of view of our US colleagues. And there's also a couple there that were new ideas that hadn't surfaced before. So the next step now is for us to take that information and to absorb it into our own thinking as a steering committee and to feed that into the roadmap process. Not sure whether I've got any more slides. Oh, yeah, sorry. So this is again the summary slide. So these are literally all of the new ideas that came out of the workshop, and you won't be able to read that, but you will be able to read it if you look at the PowerPoint later. And we then sat down, a small group of us, sat down and made a summary of those new ideas, again, under our streams, and to give us a basis for going forward in our considerations of what might be added to the roadmap or how we might tweak the roadmap to take into account that input. I think that's where I end. So I found that a useful process. It's given us more to think about. So over the next couple of months, we need to begin to feed this information, these ideas into our workshop, into our roadmap. There was actually also they actually also suggested a new stream that we should introduce. I'm not quite sure where that appears on here. Sorry. What was the new stream, Mike? Can you remember? There was a suggestion we should have another stream in our roadmap. Sorry? Was that the professional certification? Doesn't matter. It's not all that important. So Mike, of course, is now a member of the steering committee, and I want him to talk for a couple of minutes, just talking about his perception of what came out of that workshop and how it might feed into our process. So do you want to come forward? So this is Mike Kennerly. You should introduce yourself to our community.
Well, good morning. As Jim indicated, my name is Mike Kennerly. I work for the Iowa Department of Transportation, but I chair the AASHTO Joint Technical Committee on Electronic Engineering Standards. And I'm going to ask you guys all to say that fast and memorize it, because it took us a long time to figure it out. But one of the things that, Jim pointed out that I thought was really important was during that week, we brought together several of the groups that have been working on BIM, various aspects of it for the first time. We brought together, like you indicated, my technical committee, the Joint Technical Committee on Data Standardization. It's not actually, it's a subcommittee. And then we brought together the two pooled funds. And the pooled fund is just another version, consider it a mini version of BSI, where states get together and they commit a certain amount of money, and then they get, you know, a seat at the table, they vote. It works a lot like BSI, but on a much smaller scale and typically around a particular topic. But then we also brought together the FHWA and a few other folks. And like I said, it was the first time we had brought all of these groups together to talk about what was going on in the US, and more importantly, try to align ourselves, you know, in our own activities and our actions, you know, within the US. But then, you know, as Jim pointed out, we also took that opportunity to look at what was going on with BSI, you know, in particular, you know, the infra room and the streams, and start to talk about what was important to us and how that aligned with what was going on here. In some cases, maybe didn't align. But the idea was to establish where our priorities were and share that with you, you know, and see where they fell. And as Jim indicated, you know, the green indicates where they aligned, and the yellow, you know, are the US, you know, priorities. But the goal was just to put our input into this process, give you a sense of where we are, what we're thinking, what's going on in the US, and where, you know, where we think we need help, you know, in terms of making this transition. And, you know, the reality is, you know, and one of the things I was doing yesterday is, you know, they asked me, you know, what was I hoping to get out of this meeting? And I said, I just want to listen and learn. You know, and what I found was that there's a lot of similarities between what's going on, you know, in the international community with what's going on in the US community. And the same problems are being solved, you know, by you guys that we're trying to solve. And so, you know, one of the things that I shared as a takeaway in terms of reporting out, you know, to the folks who sit me over here was that I think there's a lot that we can learn from each other in terms of what you guys are trying to accomplish, what we're trying to accomplish, and how this all fits into that. And so, you know, we think this is a great opportunity for us, you know, to leverage what you guys are doing, but also for you guys to leverage what we're doing, you know, and some of the experiences that we've had in the United States. You know, one of the things that you'll see in there, and it talks about, you know, the model as a legal document. You know, that's something that we've been able to do on a number of cases, you know, in several states, and, you know, get a good sense for what that process is like and what it takes to do that, and then share that experience with you guys, but then also learn from you guys in terms of where you are in some of the other areas. And so, you know, we thought this was a great opportunity. I really thank Jim for coming in and putting up with us and trying to herd all the cats and keep us going in the right direction. You know, there's a lot of terminology that we had to try to figure out, and Jim and Ian were very instrumental in helping us do that. But we hope that this helps in terms of where we are, and we hope that we can continue, you know, to contribute moving forward. So, unless there's any questions, I know there's a lot of acronyms up there, you know. And then somebody yesterday was talking about acronyms. We are just as bad as everybody else, you know. And so if there was any of those acronyms that didn't make sense or you wanted an explanation of, I can try to do that. Or if you had any questions about the workshop.
Sorry, could you ask?
I saw in one of the earlier slides that contractual practices was one of the low priorities in the activities. Now you're talking about the model as a legal document. Isn't that something that should have come up in these priorities?
You know, we've been working on for several years now, and, you know, there are several use cases, you know, that will outline what those are. And so from our perspective, you know, that wasn't as high as the actual process for putting out the model as legal document. You know, the contractual component, I think we've got good documentation on, and I think we've got some good practices established, but that model as a legal document is still evolving. And so that's why I think you see the disparity between the two. Does that help? Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions? We've got Mike up there on the spot.
Welcome.
Welcome.
What's that?
Welcome to the infirmary.
Thank you.
Jim, just a quick question for yourself. I saw that on the priority list, machine-controlled earthworks. was actually got a lot of votes, but you didn't mention it after that. I'm just wondering, is that on the agenda anywhere, or it got 5 votes, if I remember?
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean that's a topic which I would have thought would get more votes, but it only got 5 votes, so it missed the cut, as it were. But that doesn't mean it's off the table. That's why I think it's very important that we have that list of. If you go back a few pages, where's that control? Yeah, these ones. So, yeah, somewhere in there, machine controlling got 5 votes. So it missed the 7-vote cutoff. It's an arbitrary kind of cutoff, but it gives us, we have to respond to what our community says, basically.
And if I may,
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons why it got so few votes, we've been exchanging files with contractors on machine control guidance since 2006. And so we've got a lot of experience in there, and there's a lot of documentation as to how to do it, what the contractors need, what we need to provide. And so from that perspective, because of the amount of experience that we've had providing contractors with the files for machine control guidance, it didn't get that high of a vote. Now, if we hadn't, if our experience was lower, then yeah, it probably would have. But, like I said, for us, like I said, we started in 2006. Several other states started shortly after that. And so there's a good history of that. And there's a lot of documentation in terms of what to share.
I might just add to that. There's an ISO working group that is looking at that, and they were doing that in parallel with us developing the IFC 4.3 extensions, and their report came out still based on 2D CAD drawings with spot levels and blah, 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 as the kind of raw data that goes into feeding into the machine controls to do the earthworks. We tried to persuade them to kind of short circuit that process and look, work with us to, because all of that knowledge, all that data for that is actually in IFC 4.3, and so we really need the industry to move forward and to start using that as the source for the machine control data. And I can up you, we were doing it back in 2003 in Australia, so we're way ahead of the US. Okay. Any other comments or questions? And then let's open this up for just more general conversation now.
Yeah, this is a more general question. Can you discuss the relationship between BSI and OGC and how it intersects with this particular committee, which I assume is, or this room, which I assume is one of the stronger OGC relationships?
We have worked very closely with OGC throughout the whole development of IFC 4.3, both, particularly in the alignment work. I mean, Christophe would be a good person to talk to this because he was involved in a lot of that early work. The IFC tunnel project at the moment is working very closely with OGC and the GSIML standard. In fact, I think there's if my understanding is correct, and I may be slightly wrong, it's been a two-way dialogue, and the GSIML standard is being adjusted to fit into the sort of needs that we have and vice versa around. Is that correct? Yeah, do you want to say something because you're closer to that process?
I think there will be a presentation this afternoon inside IFC tunnel. In IFC tunnel, you have two aspects. You have tunnel by itself, the civil works, but also the relationship with the geotechnical. And the job was done inside that is to work together with OGC in one hand, and I speaking of the control of the new member of the room, with geotechnical aspect modeling. And that means that at the moment there is a specific modeling from OGC and specific one from IFC. And the job done is to say, done by commonly with OGC, is to have this federation of model in order to be able to connect with the same conceptual model in terms of serialization, not before serialization, sorry, I start again. You have GML for domain approach of geotechnical. You have the approach of geotechnical from IFC. And the job done is to make the connection in order to be able to have all of the geotechnical approach connected to IFC model in order to have a full view about the tunnel and the geological and geotechnical issue. And what is important in that is you have two approach, one in OGC, one in buildingSMART. And what it is really new compare of what's happened with alignment, that you have a very something in life, still in life between OGC and BSI. And the issue we have to manage today is to have a common governance between OGC and buildingSMART of what is going to be delivered for tunnel, but also for earthworks in the future about this issue about geotechnical. Because if you come back to that geotechnical, you have two aspects. What it is linked to the civil works, typically the structure of the road, of the railway, but what, and the second one aspect of the works don't link to a road or rail. And that is the reason we need, and typically Laguna, the Laguna for the water management is not linked to the road, it's not linked to the railway stuff, but is connected together. And that the reason we need to have a federation approach about what it is delivered under GML from OGC and what is delivered from buildingSMART under IFC. And what it is really new and we have to progress is to have to elaborate a common governance of that, because that means that there is a common model and they have to, the maintenance of that has to be done together. And what has to be done also together, the implementation, because we need to have software vendors involved together in order to be able to implement in the for instance, in clash detection tools, what is coming from under GML, what is coming under IFC, because the truth is there. So that is really something new and to be elaborate about the digital twin, how the common governance in digital twin between OGC and buildingSMART. I think that is something to elaborate, and we are in progress with a workshop, common workshop between OGC and buildingSMART about the issue about GIS and so on. But it's larger than there only is a question of GIS, and it's a question of digital twin governance. So maybe you can add something about that, because. Okay, thank you.
Did that answer your question? I mean, I can say there's a very strong collaboration between not only infrastructure room, but also BSI generally with OGC. It's been very productive. I might just add one thing to and this is a layman's understanding, but my understanding is that GeoSciML is really a geology model, schema, and it's been adapted to handle geotechnics, which is of course a different question. Geology is about what's there. Geotechnics is it's more to do with what the implications are of what's there for what we are going to try and do, build a tunnel or cut a road through it. So, and I wasn't part of those conversations, so I don't really know what was resolved, but my understanding is that that collaboration has occurred. There was another hand a second ago. No? Okay. So any other questions? So the next steps now for us as a steering committee will be, and I've been re-elected back to the steering committee, so I guess I'm going to have to continue to contribute to this process. Darn. Will be for us to take all this input and we need to flesh it out as a roadmap. And we'll have Mike's contribution to that as a now a member of the steering committee. And I hope that by the next summit, we'll be able to report on what the roadmap is that you finally agreed to, and how we're starting to implement that roadmap. We have a few months to do that.
Just because it was not mentioned in the roadmap, but it's the first priority. It's what's happening in ISO today. that you have to know that IC 4.3 is now in ballot in ISO since the 20th of February. And the end of the ballot is the 15th of May. So I think it's very much important that any country participating to the development of IC 4.3 it's very important that each country participating to that is involved in the vote, in the ballot of that. So I want underline that that it has to be approved if we want to be that the process is the perspective is the end of the ballot is the 15th of May. So verify that someone from your country is participating for that. Check your standardization organization in any country to verify that they are. I know already that not any country, any chapter of buildingSMART are some representative inside that, so verify that. Secondly, it's important to know that if we want to have this process going to success for the end of the year, is to support that. Even if you have some remarks on that it's important to know that in any case you have FC folder for arriving, and if you have any comments, we are very happy to accept that, but we have this double process arriving, and I think that what it is really much expecting by the end user and owners, that to have the ISO process completed in order to be able to implement in the contract the IC 4.3 with the new name of IC very early. The perspective is to have the approval for the end of the year. Now we have the end of the year, and maybe early, but it depends the number of comments and so on. So I think that take care about that. That we have time to comment, but I think it's time to approve in order to move forward. And we know that we are going to have a new step with FC 4.4. So I think that really we have to make the pressure to go as fast as possible to the approval. I see Karen say, okay, saying again that it will be late. No, the time is 15th of May, and the publication could be, if it's successful, during in October. So I think that is the perspective. So take care of that. So have a look about your national organization of standardization to verify that they are involved in that. So I know that Korea is not a member of that, is not participating. So have a look about that. I have also country, like I think I know we have some progress, but take care. I'm not going to make any announcement to the police that nobody is there. But,
it's important to, I don't know whether it's worth saying this, it's important to understand that the ISO process, at this stage, we're voting for a DIS, a draft international standard, and in that voting process, there are two kinds of, you either vote yes or no, but in adding comments, you either comment on editorial comments, which are really saying this piece of the documentation needs to be corrected or refined or clarified, and technical comments. And if there are too many technical comments, then ISO will come back to us and say those technical comments need to be resolved before we'll go to publication. And we have no control over that. That's a decision that ISO will make based on the sorts of comments that come back and whether they judge those comments to be technical or editorial. And so that's really what Christophe is talking about. If there are too many technical issues raised, in fact, I suspect if there's any technical questions raised that can't be easily addressed from our side, then it'll go for a further vote. It'll go to an FDIS vote, and we need to resolve those technical issues and put it back out there for a further vote. And that will push the whole process back to, I'm guessing, finalization maybe by the end of the year, but probably beyond the end of the year, I fear. So I don't know, we can't influence that process. We have to allow that process to run. But
yeah, so something to add. We have done a job with Jim and some other people to verify that what it is delivered by buildingSMART is good enough in terms of quality. Good enough means that continuity between IC 4.3 and IC 4. That we are absolutely sure that it's working. Absolutely sure. we work a lot to verify any entities in IFC4 compared to IFC 4.3. That is absolutely sure. The only one, what we know that maybe they can have some comments, but we are sure that also is be compliant between IFC 4, IFC 4.3, and IFC 4.4. So in terms of quality checking, we have worked a lot about that with experts from ISO and people coming from buildingSMART. And really, I think it's the first time that buildingSMART is able to deliver something with a really quality checking done. So, okay, nothing is perfect. We know that, but it's time to move forward. And I think that Karen is going to support that.
No, we're just talking a lot about the ISO standard, but as a client, we are ready to start requiring IFC 4.3 already today. We need to start pushing this out to the market so we in the infrastructure industry can also start getting some of the benefits. Of course, there's a risk with IFC 4.3 being the standard 16739 being delayed further, but we need to start pushing it. And we know the software vendors are on board. They have implemented most of them, and we just need to start getting some of those benefits because we are a little bit stuck in 3D CAD still. And so that's, I don't think we need to wait. It's quite dramatic every time Christoph says it's going to be delayed another 3 months, but yeah.
Hi, so I mean, looking at the roadmap there, the date was until 2027, if I'm not mistaken. So what about IFC 5 and sort of the impact of that on this? And I didn't see that on the roadmap there. What sort of the impact of that?
That's a fair question, and the answer is we don't know either. And that's why we need to work with the technical team, the technical stream, if you like, to understand how that progresses and to make sure we are working with that. That's how I see it. We don't really know the answer yet. IFC 5 is starting to take more shape, but it's not there yet. And until it is, we can feed into that, and hopefully members of our community are doing that. But we can't. All we can do is make sure we follow that process, that the progress of that, and make sure that it does meet our needs. That's my view. Is that shared by everybody else? No.
Yeah, sorry. No, it's a good question, and we have to take care about that. No, it's a very good question. We have to take care of that. But in any case, the perspective, first of all, ISO of 4.3 adopted by ISO. Secondly, we know that the next step, in any case, is IC 4.4 for tunnel and geotechnical issue, and maybe some other issue, but mainly for that. And that is a perspective for the next 1 or 2 years, something like that. After that, it's a question to be debated with the end user, that if we can change the standard every 2 years, or if the standard is to be implemented for long term. And in the roadmap, he say that we are speaking about IC as archive file. That means it's a long-term perspective in any case. It's a long-term perspective. If we take just a question of scheduling time, we are going to start to implement IC 4.3 in the project, maybe this year or next year. Okay, for a new project. A new project design is 2 or 3 years. Then you have to construct. So that means that when you are going to start with IC 4.3 or IC 4.4, that means for the next 10 years, if you want to use IC as archive, that means that the perspective is to maintain that for the next 10 years. That is the timing for us. The shorter one. So that means that the question of C5 is another one question to be managed in parallel, but in terms of asset management, we can say like that, the perspective is 10 to 20 at least years. I mean, 20 to 20 years.
Yes, I'm an eternal optimist, and I'm hoping that we can progress much more rapidly through the implementation process with 4.3. That is, the industry will start to support us, the software vendors will start to support us. sooner rather than later. But a lot of the industry is still using 2x3, and that's kind of scary. IFC4 hasn't really had that much impact across the industry, and I think that there are reasons for that, but let's not go into that. But we need to really encourage the infrastructure sector to engage with 4.3, because that's where we have and 4.4. If indeed it becomes 4.4, I'm told we can't assume that, but when the tunnel extensions are added to the mix, that's when we really need to push it forward in our and demand it of our software vendors who we're relying on, that they implement it and use it, and our clients demand it. Otherwise, we'll be 10 years down the track and people will still be saying, well, when are we going to start seeing 4.3 used? And we don't want that. But we're the ones that can control that. We're the ones that have to go back to our clients, and the clients have to go back to the software vendors and say, we need this. Otherwise, it won't happen.
But I don't know if you remember, yesterday there was a presentation from one of the software vendors, and they had the reasons why we sort of were progressing in the industry. And the last reason there, the one before, was COVID making the clouds technologies better and everything. And the next one was client. It had owner on the last step. And I think we have a big responsibility there as owners, infrastructure owners, to start requiring. I already said that, but yeah.
We've got 10 more minutes. Are there any other issues that people want to raise? Hand back to my noble leader.
Thank you, Tim. So if there is no more questions, I think that we are ready to close the infra-room first session, and I assume that there will be a lunch somewhere in the end of these long corridors. So good luck finding the place, and see you in the afternoon in the tunnel session. Thank you all. These long corridors. So good luck finding the place, and see you in the afternoon in the tunnel session. Thank you all.